think that's good to get started here. So let me go ahead and turn this off so folks can see our faces. Thank you everyone for attending today. My name is Matt McGurk. I'm a solution architect here at Source Defense. I'm going to introduce my guest here in just one moment. Our goal today is to have a roundtable discussion around PCI DSS version 4, and specifically a couple requirements called 6.4.3 and 11.6.1 that deal with the code running on web pages where there's card data present. I'm fortunate enough to be joined by a couple of experts in this area, Art Cooper and Nate Rich. Maybe Art, I can ask you to start with yourself. You're with Intersec, you're an expert in this field, and anything else you'd like us to know?
Actually, I'm with Trusted Sec.
Excuse me.
And no problem. Some people call it Trusted SEC, or we get a lot of that. But yeah, I've been involved with IT and security type stuff for over 40 years, and still love it, find it fascinating. And but I've been involved with PCI since pretty much day one, I think that this is a really important discussion we're going to have here today, because these two new requirements are going to catch some merchants off guard, I think. So with that, that's enough
right.
about me. Nobody's here to hear about me.
And we're also joined by Nate Rich, who is a manager at Security Risk Advisors. Nate, thanks so much for joining. Just a little bit more about your background, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. And like I said, I am a manager here at SRA. I've been with the company for about 10 years now. A lot of that time has been around PCI, as well as other compliance frameworks, maturity frameworks, and security strategy. I've been doing InfoSec for a while now, so it's an interesting space to be. And right now, as it relates to PCI and these new controls, I think it's a really interesting time to be looking at our environments and understanding what is the impact of some of these changes. So I think this will be a good talk. I'm excited to hear from Coop as well, and as a group sort of learn from each other. So it'll be good.
I think that's exactly what we want to do. And I'd mention to our audience again, as we're talking, feel free to submit questions through the chat. We'll take them as they come. We'll make sure that any gets collected at the end in case we can't get to them. But nonetheless, let's kick it off. So again, for context, we're talking about two very specific parts of the new DSS requirements in version 4. They deal with JavaScript in payment pages. So if you're doing e-commerce activities or really any other kind of payment transaction via a web browser, this is of relevance to you. I think what I kind of want to ask to get started, do you guys feel that the definition of a payment page or the payment part of a web application has changed under DSS 4 at all? Like, what's a payment page at this point? I guess is kind of my question. So maybe Art, we can start with you.
You want to start with me, huh? Okay. Well, a payment page to me is anything that collects a payment card data. So if there's going to be any inputting of a payment card data by the end user, then that is indeed a payment page, that in its simplest form.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that for sure. I mean, I think the scope of that page, we might now have to think about it differently than we did in the past. But I think largely speaking, if I put my credit card in a field on a page on a website, I'm going to consider that a payment page. So.
Mm-hmm. And I think that there's some cases for where card data is presented as well, potentially sort of like a digital wallet page or a My Account page for those checkouts as well. I know what I've heard in almost all of the conversations I've had over the last, I guess it's about 8 months since March when the revisions came out, are around, okay, well, what about iframes? What about totally carved out, like tokenized payment processes? Do you guys see any changes from the strategies folks like merchants would use in 3.2.1?
Go ahead, Nate.
Yeah. yeah, I think this is going to be the surprise for a lot of merchants in the next couple of years, right? And I know that we already have started talking about with our clients, our repeat clients, they need to start thinking about how they're going to address this, because in the past, that's been one of our great scope reduction technologies, right, is an iframe. And so you got an iframe on the page and you're good. assuming that the iframe is good and like all that sort of thing. We're going to ask them a lot of hard questions now that they haven't had to answer before about the things surrounding that iframe. And so that's going to definitely change things for clients or for merchants.
Yeah, I think the thing that is funny is if you look at some of these payment websites, I call them 1990s technology, where they literally, they've had just an old flat website kind of sitting out there with their iframe, and they think we're good. And what they don't realize is, if you dig deep into some of those old so-called 90s architecture web pages, there's a bunch of scripting and all kinds of things going on that they don't really fully understand. And the fact that there's an iframe embedded in that code was pretty much their, I don't want to say get out of jail free card, but it was like, well, that's where the payment goes. So that's a SAC payment channel, and woohoo. And now it's like, well, guess what's in SAC?
Yeah, that language in the SAQA about any page that contains a link or forwards to a payment processor or so on and so forth, to my reading, really broadens the thing out. So like you said, that transfer liability, unfortunately, is less complete, and a lot of the stuff got dragged back into scope, which is tough. That's a tough thing. I guess how then do we look at our trust, or for merchants, I suppose, our trusted payment service providers? Like, is that, I think, Art, I've heard you say in other conversations, like it has been somewhat rubber stamped that we have this in place, and so therefore everything must be okay. Are folks becoming more critical of that relationship and how it actually impacts their compliances, I suppose?
I've always been critical of it from a security standpoint, but you take, for instance, no endorsement here or no negativity, but let's look at like what Salesforce has with their e-commerce cloud stuff. The back end of that, a lot of people use them, and then there's Shopify and all these other types of solutions where they have their iframe goes out, their payment pages exist out there, even all of the web content, everything's done by that service provider. So for years and years, that was a panacea to the merchants. Well, I've got my SAC payment channel. That's up to Shopify or Salesforce e-commerce cloud or whoever is out there hosting my payment page, and they back end tied to the payment processor. So what do I care? And what they don't realize is that I've seen many a breach with something simple, something as simple as not turning on multi-factor for your back end access into your own payment page, or just something dumb like that. So this is definitely something that I personally have railed on, but my personal feelings about security can't necessarily make a client do anything above and beyond what the compliance requirement asks for. And that's I think going to be the biggest challenge, because now they're going to have to do much more. And I think that, like you said, that page that you're clicking on to get out there to make payments and so on and so forth, that to me is one of the most dangerous pages there is, because that's the one, if I'm a bad guy, that's the one I want to hijack.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the question of at what point, and I always like to look at everything like you're describing, Coop, from the perspective of the bad guy, right? And so even in audits, I do a lot of other security work that isn't audits or framework compliance stuff, and we always take that attacker perspective, and so I like to bring that into these assessments. And again, we can't, if you pass the control and we can't, then you pass the control. I'm going to tell you what I think would be best practice and how you can improve and get even better and go beyond the control. And some clients are receptive to that and want to talk about that, and they're like, yeah, actually that's a really great point. I should make sure that I have MFA on that control or that page, or I have that page locked down or whatever. And others are like, I'm good. I don't need to invest any more into that. And I think what we're going to see this year is those clients, those merchants who are doing what they have to do to be compliant, are going to be surprised, and they're going to have to start looking at things a little more critically. And I kind of expect, I have really good relationships with most of my clients on this front, but I do kind of expect some merchants to push back and say, well, I read it this way, and their reading is a little soft. And so, there will have to be some dialogue and discussion there But I think regardless of how you read it, there's going to be new investment and new scrutiny put on this this whole process.
Yeah, and I think that newness that you mentioned is what's kind of, I don't want to say caught anyone by surprise, because everyone, we're still relatively early in the 4.0 life cycle. People are doing their due diligence and figuring it out, but this is an enhanced area of concern over other versions. Source Defense has been solving for this, and I promise it won't turn into a pitch, but we've been solving it for a long time around the practical security standpoint, where if you have scripts in your web pages and they aren't controlled, you're really extending a huge amount of trust and permission and capability to all of your partner, all that code that's hosted out on the internet in the most generous sense of trust. So where am I going with this? I guess the question is that, or what I wanted to amplify was that I think sometimes as security practitioners, we get hung up on this idea of like trying to crack the black box or solve the puzzle, or like, how could someone get into the payment page? And what I've had to learn is to keep in mind, from the attacker standpoint, all they care about is stealing the credit card number. So it doesn't matter if they can't get into the iframe or they can't break into your payment gateway provider or whatever. If they can manipulate the web page to show a form that says, hey, I'll give you $50 if you type in your card number, that's going to work a lot of the time, and it doesn't have to do any of the rest of the stuff. So although these new requirements are kind of, let's just call them kind of annoying and broaden the scope quite a bit, I do feel that they're like the right thing for the ecosystem of payments online.
Yeah, for sure.
So I guess, so I'm curious, I read a report, I can't, maybe we'll provide the link afterwards because it was valuable research, we should give credit, describing how different compliance officers and security folks were prioritizing changes in DSS4, kind of like a gap analysis combined with a effort analysis. So like, we view this XYZ as hardest to solve and as most urgent to solve, or like we're least prepared for. If you guys kind of had to eyeball it, for 643 and 1161, just in whatever conversations you have, where are people putting this? Like in terms of hard to solve and prepared to solve it,
All right.
I'll tell you what I read, which was right in the middle. Like basically the stack rank, it was in the middle of like, I need to deal with this, but I want to get it out of the way quickly because I have other more pressing stuff, but it's still kind of a challenge when we're going to have to really put some effort into it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think unfortunately, people prioritize things wrong, and even the PCI prioritized approach notwithstanding, they still will take things based on cost, is what I see a lot. It always comes down to dollars. Generally, at the end of the day, it's always about the Benjamins, and so unfortunately, myself personally, I've been railing on web security for a long time because, come on, this is where the breaches are happening. Is they're coming in on the back end. They like you said. I love that thing you just said about if I put up a page that says I'll give you $50 if you put your card in. Think of how many e-com vendors now are actually doing pop-ups or emails that say, if you give me your phone number and allow me to send you text messages, I will, do this, that, and the other. And boy, those are just popping up everywhere. And this is the same exact thing you've described. To me, this should be priority number one. But because they already have their network security devices in place. It's not like, you're moving from a stance that you already had to a stance to cover these new requirements. So let's take those new requirements and prioritize them. And my personal opinion is, that the new encryption stuff and this new web stuff should be paramount as far as getting it done and getting on it. That's me anyway. I don't know. We'll see what Nate thinks.
Yeah, no, I think I think you're right. Especially when we talk about prioritization in terms of, bandwidth, and that shows up in budgets, right? And that shows up in cost and those sorts of things. And so organizations, and a lot of times it's not even our people that we're talking to, our primary contacts within the organizations that even get to make the decision, right? They're like, I only have, this much of a pot to work from, and so I need to do the thing that makes the most sense. And when we see, new controls that need to be done more immediately in order to, remain compliant in 2024. Some of these other things are going to be like, yeah, we know that's a best practice and we'll get to it, but like we just don't have the bandwidth, the time, the budget, the time, resources look at that right now. And I think that's what we're seeing a lot of times. And so for those organizations that are having to prioritize in this way, there's, there's always the question, is there like an easy way for me to get this done and just like pay, somebody to get this fixed? Or is this something where I need to actually invest a lot of my time to support that implementation or to support that effort? And all of those are factors that every organization is going to have to go through to say, yeah, we'll get, my number one priority, the thing that my boss needs to see is that we don't let our rock lapse this year in 2024. And so I'm going to do what I need to do to be compliant in 2024. And like, I'm going to let next year worry about itself. And so that, unfortunately that is happening. Organizations that have the bandwidth and have big PCI teams and robust security programs are able to, have a more, nuanced conversation with us about what does really need to be done, and they're able to start testing and doing some like investigative work on their side to see what does it really mean to be compliant to these two specific new controls, and what does it mean to be monitoring our payment page and things, and they have they're able to do some initial research or development there, which is nice. But I think most are sort of chasing that bandwidth problem.
I completely agree. All that was excellent. I think that it's a great summation. It's also super valuable to get like actual opinions rather than the vagaries of a report or a white paper. And I've heard the same thing. And again, I'm trying not to be too prejudiced to my own company, but irrespective of how someone chooses to approach these, I've seen time and time again folks have a kind of a not invented here sort of approach to it. Like we'll tackle this with our own internal development resources and time, and surely we can get our hands around this if we have a competent, and you certainly can. But for me, all roads, like you guys said, eventually kind of lead back to cost and price. Unfortunately, like it'd be great if it all led back to quality and the perfect solution. But what I'm trying to get at is like the person hours I've seen poured into this particular issue that have then been replaced by a tool is huge. Like people try to operationalize it, and unfortunately it turns into kind of a quagmire sometimes. So just a hopefully not too biased piece of a suggestion to folks out there who are doing the research, consider, and maybe you guys want to say I'm wrong, but consider very seriously like the burden that puts on a team to operationalize those things rather than how easy it might be to develop, quote unquote.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that I like to keep in mind, I think, a solution and automation is great. And where we can do that, it can lead to some cost savings in the long run. I think the things that I always remind my clients of are a couple of different issues. Is onboarding, so implementing that tool. It's going to require some of your internal expertise from the merchant side to partner with your implementation partner, your tool partner, to make sure that you're getting all the things checked and all the right boxes done, and you're covering all of the appropriate bases. So it's not a zero-sum game at the implementation level. You may get some efficiencies after implementation, but the other piece is, as a QSA firm, is when we come in and we do this audit, 3 years from now, and somebody has an automated tool that's, doing this for them, I'm still going to be interested in the processes that they operate around that tool, right? I'm still going to have questions about, okay, well, you turned this thing on and walked away from it, and you haven't done anything with it for 3 years. Like, I want to know that you're still, tuning it, and you're still monitoring it, and you're still, looking at the outputs of those things and making sure that it's updated appropriately. So it adds automation, it adds help, and it can streamline in the long run. The thing that I always consider, if I look at it from the perspective of that CISO or that, internal audit lead that is, looking at a bandwidth issue and saying, I don't have the room for this, is I caution that putting a tool in doesn't always solve that problem for you, because you don't know what your processes are. So sometimes I actually like a manual process. I like spreadsheets and I like scripts, because I can work through that process and I can understand what works really well for my organization, rather than putting in some automation that says, oh, we've got this covered for you. And then you don't get the chance to get that really fine-grained look at your environment. So it's a balancing act, and every organization, every merchant's going to take their own perspective on that. But I always want to remind people it's important that you know your process, and we don't just buy a process, because the tool is only meant to facilitate the process, only as good as the process that it's facilitating. So.
Yep.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I think that's very well said. especially as folks are doing this first blush kind of research and figuring out how they need to approach it. That groundwork of defining your requirements. Give me good requirements, I'll get you a good solution, right? Isn't that what they say? But Art, I may have cut you off.
No, you cut me off. What I was going to say is everything that Nate said is 100% true. As a matter of fact, some of my best clients in terms of real security versus just compliance, I always tell my clients compliance is the floor, security is the ceiling. Let's aim a little higher than the wood on the floor. And, some of my best clients don't have many tools at all. I had a client one time that actually ran a payments gateway, and he and a high school buddy had literally built this thing from the ground up, and it was all running on Linux systems. And I have to tell you, going out there every year to do their PCI assessment to me was almost a joke because they were so far ahead of every requirement. They had layers and layers of things they were doing, and it was all manual processes, and it was all people involved. And what was so cool is as they grew and made more money, rather than buying fancy tools, they added employees, and they would put people on these different various processes and operations that they had. And I mean, these guys were super duper secure. So, the fact that they had to do the compliance because, as a gateway, Visa and MasterCard and, the other payment schemes want to see that, they're compliant. But not only were they compliant, they were great. Then I've had other clients with huge budgets. I mean, literally millions of dollars and huge staffs, and they go out and they buy every bloody tool on the planet. And then when I go in to assess them, not one person there can tell me what's coming out of the tool or how it gets used or why it was put in the first place. That one always kills me is, well, what are you really doing with this tool? Well, I think, you shouldn't be saying, I think, this is an $80,000 item, you think? And that, you made me think of that, Nate, when you're talking about that sometimes, they need to get their hands around their own processes and logistics of how they operate versus just buying a tool and slapping it in there. But with these two requirements, I'm going to be honest with you. Me personally, I just don't see how many of my clients, I can't speak for the world, but I know most of my clients really well. I can't see their development teams being able to put together something to do what 643 and 1161 are asking. Now, that doesn't mean down the road they can't, but right now, as it sits, they need a tool. Then they need to make sure that they put together successful management and successful operations around that tool.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's like everything else, it's time, money, and resources, right? And especially when you have a ticking clock of March 2025 to not just do this, but the hundreds of other little things that are now different. It's about everyone should be so fortunate, right, to get to start over and begin with all new people and build the processes from the ground up and grow it organically. And I think we all three of us have probably seen across our career. It's more like you walk into the middle of the thing and you kind of go, all right, all this is a little wacky. Let's fix the thing that needs the most fixing. And then, so anyway, it's about picking the right approach for the job, right? And it's challenging on the vendor side. It has been for a while. Not that anyone needs to hear a sob story from a vendor, but this has been a very gap problem. It's been a very niche kind of problem from the practical security standpoint. That ceiling you were talking about, Art. And so we've for years had to kind of engineer around like get in there and get out, like provide the tool that does the thing or fits into the process and solves the problem, and don't try to bloat it or make it a thing or whatever. And so frankly, before the carrot and the stick of the compliance, we would tell people that and they'd solve it, and we have tons of customers and et cetera, but it's put us in a really good spot to still be that kind of let's get in and get out and solve the problem and not turn into we're not a full stack everything for everything that you got to replace. This is a new weird thing. Let's help you get it out of the way kind of deal. As we talk about getting it out of the way, what do you think, what would you say? Let's see. I heard about initially solving the problem, getting your hands around it, et cetera. When you've talked to folks who are just getting their hands around it, are they taking kind of like an inventorying and scanning and let's get our feet under us approach? What are people doing initially? Like, is it a scanning approach? Is it a organizational process thing for the payment pages in specific? Where are they taking their first bite of this steak, so to speak?
Go ahead, Nate.
Yeah, no, it's a good question because I think so many merchants and so many of our clients, I think, are trying not to be overwhelmed. Let's put it that way. Trying not to be look at this thing and say, wow, this is a really big problem. And they're trying to find what part of that elephant do I start on? Where's this first bite? And so, we've got client organizations that are, looking at tools or looking at, technical solutions that already exist in the existing technologies, whether they're other tools or, CSPs or SRIs or things like that. We've got, other organizations that are like, I know my organization, I know my payment pages, and I don't know who to even talk to about an inventory of scripts. Or I did a whole inventory of my main payment page, and then all of a sudden, like, marketing came to me and was like, oh, by the way, you know that I have that Facebook pixel on there, or whatever it is, right? Like, so I think right now, and really for the last year or so, most of the clients we're working with are like, hey, help us identify that first bite, help us know where we need to start. And we're pointing at different things, but depending on their environment and their organization. And yeah, we're, sort of they're looking to figure out, how do we get the ball rolling? Are there any quick wins? Generally, there's not. There's, lots to do here, and they just have to find a place to get started and get traction. Some of that's defined by their internal expertise. What do they already know? What do they have on their team? And then where do they need to have relationships with, third parties that can come in and help them identify these things?
Yeah, I would agree. I couldn't have said it better, sir. And I would agree 100%. In fact, one of my clients kind of made me laugh because I was having a conversation with the actual architect who had pretty much built their payment pages, and they've sort of turned it into like what they call a little payment app that they use, and all the mobile comes in through it, and all of the web comes through it, and then on the back end, standard iframe goes out to Fiserv, and very something we see all the time is QSA is really common one. And what's funny is here's the guy who actually put this all together, and he was trying to put a list together of what he thought were the scripts that were out there. He came up with 3 scripts, and the only reason he knew these 3 was because this is what he initially had put into the page. And when we did a scan, we started looking at what he had. He lost his mind. It reminded me of that movie Scanners in the 80s, where the guy could make your head blow up, because I swear his head blew up. Because as you all know, this, here's this script that then pulls in this one, that then pulls in these 5, that then and I mean, I've never seen anything like it in my life. And he's just stopped and said, okay, we really have to take stock of this situation now and figure out, what is going on here. And like you said, I think it's a little overwhelming to them, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I think that's, I've also seen that kind of exploding head moment. I mean, not to the graphic extent of the movie Scanners, but nonetheless, yeah, that kind of, there's a unfortunate moment of realization of like, yeah, okay, all right, we got to actually do something about this. But like I said, in terms of the overall health of the ecosystem, like, it is the right thing to do. You're going to be putting your customers, or the merchant's going to be putting their customers in a better place security-wise. The overall liability for the organization is, in a practical sense, going to go down, and all of our credit card fees will hopefully, well, they're not going to go down, but hopefully they'll stay the same because the fraud doesn't increase too very much. I think that was an interesting point you made about mobile and kind of the unified app approach. I have a very specific question from the chat, which is, to what extent does 643 apply to mobile applications? Is that still out of scope? Again, we're specifically talking about 643. Or is the integrity of the code in a non-prod environment before it goes to prod applicable for the requirement? So I guess what I'm hearing there is, are native mobile apps in scope for this? And I have an answer, but I'm curious what you guys think.
That's here we go with my old put 3 QSAs in a room, ask a question, get 3 different answers. I think that we have to look at what part of the mobile app we're talking about. When somebody uses a mobile app and puts their credit card information into a digital wallet, which is 99% of the case with most of these apps, you're using that app on your phone as a proxy for the payment card. So as the payment card holder, I don't think there's a lot of responsibility for that piece of that code in terms of these two requirements, but everything past there, it absolutely applies because obviously most of these mobile apps that I see, like the ones that you see that Olo puts out and all these other big houses that do mobile apps for stores and restaurants and things like that, their gateway is generally the same or very similar to the same payment page that someone would use if they went to that merchant's website too. So that's a good question. I don't think it's going to apply, like I said, to that little piece that sits on the phone per se, but maybe I'm interpreting it wrong. What do you think, Nate?
No, I was going to say, I mean, what I would do, the way I approach this is I want to understand the design and architecture of that application. So I'm gonna ask you for some design documentation. I'm probably gonna want to talk to your app designer, and I'm gonna understand how is this implemented, because I think, like you said, there is some stuff that would be great and I'm fine with, and there's some stuff where I'm like, well, really all you've done is you've loaded a web page inside of this application container. And so there is a spectrum or a range of ways that this can be done. And so I think I agree 100% with you. Like, there are certainly areas where I would be like, okay, this doesn't really apply, I'm good. But I think there's a lot of opportunities to do it in a way where I would be very uncomfortable with saying we're good without applying the controls. And so it's going to involve some discussion and some communication with the teams that know stuff about the way it's done.
This is like the old QSA training. Remember, it depends. Remember the old QSA training, and I must admit, I was one of the trainers once. We had these 4 stock answers. Ask the brands, ask the acquirer, it depends, or ask your QSA.
Yeah.
I like that. I wish I could say it depends more often in my life. It sounds a comfortable place to be, right?
Yeah, the folks sitting in class never liked it. I can tell you that, right?
I'll tell you, my daughters don't like it either when they ask for something, and I'm like, maybe it depends. They don't like that either.
Let me clarify your requirements, and then we'll move. No, I'm kidding. So yeah, I can only come at it from a technical standpoint. I spent a long time in web application development and just a touch of mobile dev. The key for me in this one is payment page scripts. So page and scripts. So a lot of mobile, if it's a full-blown native mobile application written in Go or whatever we're doing, mobile apps, Java for Android, so on and so forth, there's very few cases I can think of where third-party JavaScript is going to be integrated on the fly into that native mobile app, because unless it's using an HTML render, sorry guys, for anyone who's not so technical on the phone in the audience, sorry, but unless it's using a native HTML renderer and JavaScript engine within the web app, then it's not quite the same issue. I think you're still absolutely, of course, going to have matters to address in DSS4 overall with that app. But the other trick to this is that mobile applications are often as developers, we cheat a little bit and we simply wrap a native application around a web browser. So you actually end up hitting the same web application, in which case that application that is actually just presenting a web page is 1000%, well, potentially in scope if it does have JavaScript on that page that it hits, and it depends, right? But yeah, I think what Nate and what you said is you just got to think about the architecture of the app. And as part of a more holistic process, right, to be actually practically secure. A little more about scope. We've talked about payment pages, and of course we're doing a DSS thing here. What about authentication pages as well? And so I'll take a stab at that at first. I'm curious how this comes up in your guys' analysis. Is that from a practical security standpoint, outside of card data, like making your website actually secure? Yeah, absolutely. You should have control over any scripts that are interacting with any sensitive data. Sometimes in the past, I've talked about tax season in the United States, where think about all the web apps that we touch to fill out our taxes, like maybe an online tax preparation software, but also our investment site, our HR site, 3 or 4 other things that all transmit data. back and forth, which is valuable and is regulated in a bunch of different senses. So I'm curious, as you guys look at an app, obviously we're talking about payment page scripts in 643, but you look at the whole thing overall, what do you recommend to people about authentication and sensitive info in general? Maybe Nate, if you want to kick it off.
Yeah, sure. So I think, you bring up a really good question about those pages that are ultimately going to lead us to the payment page, right? And then authentication and maybe where I have stored card data and that kind of thing. I think it's a little bit of like Art, you said, the compliance floor versus the security ceiling. So I'm going to always, if I find anything as a part of my audit, I'm always making recommendations. Whether or not it impacts the ROC, it doesn't matter. I'm going to tell my clients, hey, here's a thing that you can do that would make your world better and protect your customers. Now, one of the things that we're doing a lot internally at SRA right now is talking about where do we start considering this a payment? Does the payment page just be the place where I enter the credit cards, or should I, if that payment page is a redirect to, Shopify or whatever else that, you mentioned earlier, that link that takes us to that page. And so for me, the authentication page is the same thing, right? That link that takes me to that page, I should at least think about that and talk about what the implication is there and how the impact to that is. So me and my clients are going to have some conversations about that. I think, where do we sit today with, do I need to apply the same level of scrutiny from 643 to that authentication page or that link that takes me to an external payment page? I think we're having those conversations internally. We're talking to our clients about that today. We still have some time to work through this question. But I think we're leaning towards, we're going to want some sort of evidence from you that you're looking at that page as if it was the payment page, or you're thinking about it in that way. We can't fail you on this year anyways, so that helps, right? But we want to make sure that you're doing the best thing you can for your clients, for your company, for your organization, and we think that this is an important thing. So exactly how that ends up playing out in 2025 for us, I think is still a bit of an open question, but I think at the very least, we're going to look at it and we're going to talk to you about it.
I would agree. I don't know that I'd have much to add to that. That's perfect. And I can tell you that here at Trusted Sec, that's going to be our tack. And I haven't really set everybody down. I just know this team really well, and we're not going to stray from that. I think we're going to make that pretty clear that, look, if this is the page that you go to that leads you or authenticates you to get to that payment page, we need that to have the same protection. So, and certainly, you know how it is. There's always the case by case. Like when I used to teach the QSAs, we used to always say that the client defines the scope and you validate it. But unfortunately, it never works that way. Generally, the client defines the scope. You go in and validate, yes, that's correct. And here's 10 other things that you missed. And so that's where this is going to end up falling, I think, coming down the road.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you both, Nate in particular, you hit it right on the head. I think speaking from the technical standpoint, something to consider is that, our tools work great whether you do it on the payment page or the whole site. It's not what I'm getting at, but people who are first approaching this may want to consider it might actually be harder to secure just the payment pages rather than your whole application. Like it's kind of counterintuitive. You would think taking a more focused approach, no matter what approach you take, to solving it, vendor tool, some other technology, trying to narrow the focus because of how web apps are usually written to just the payment pages may be a red herring, so to speak. Like you may end up spending more time trying to parse that out rather than getting just solving the problem for the whole site and being more secure in general. So again, that one's somewhat non-biased. It's literally just easier to do a lot of the time because of how web apps work. Let's see, a couple from the chat, a couple from my notes. Here's one I'm gonna phrase. So basically, what I hear sometimes is, did I already fix this? Or did we already do this? So I want to put more eloquently. If and when you guys hear about this, are people confused sometimes thinking that their WAF covered this or that they already addressed this issue? I'm curious, what is a common confusion over other areas of DSS or other tools that may lead people to think they're more secure than they are, I guess?
Yeah, I've already been asked that several times. I thought we fixed this with requirement 6.6 and we put WAFs in, or we had web application reviews and assessments. And I've had to explain that several times, that it's kind of a different thing. You would think if you did a web application review that you should know all those scripts, but as we all know, those scripts feed to others, to others, to others, to others, and so yeah. And an application assessment just doesn't typically. So let's take it. Maybe they're using some automated tool. And there are some great tools out there, to look at web code and find all of the problems that we quote have fixed. And I think people are mixing this up with cross-site scripting and some other things. I've heard that request a CSRF. I've heard that, and I've tried to explain to them, no, those are actually very different things. And so you have to draw them a picture. But they are confusing the stuff a little bit, and they are saying, I thought that, what are we doing?
The good news is I love drawing pictures, Coop, so it's perfect. Like I communicate almost exclusively in pictures,
That's right.
No, I think you're right on. And even some of the things that we've heard recently are, oh, we do vulnerability scanning, or oh, we have file integrity monitor in place. And I'm like, well, explain to me how that works. What is that doing for you? A lot of times what I try and do is, it's a great education point. And a lot of the folks, they already know this. Well, it depends. When our clients that have strong technical skills, usually, this is if it's run out of a CISO's office or something like that, we have strong technical skills where people are thinking about the thing that they're working on, but not necessarily thinking about the full implication always. And so if I start priming them with some questions, okay, explain to me how your vulnerability scanning is working. Explain to me how your app review worked, or your pen test worked, or whatever. We can get them to come to the answer themselves and be like, okay, well, let's look at the control and understand what we're trying to do. And you can see where you have a gap in that control, because you're looking at something different. If it's a less technical audience, then it's a great time for me to teach them something about the technology that they're protecting, right? And I don't expect them to become web developers or anything like that, but the more that they know, even if they don't retain everything I teach them, they can go back to their boss and they can say, well, actually, here's some technical things that I can impress you with to help you understand that, our QSA firm said we're no good. We need to do something else, whatever. So I think it's really an education opportunity. And then it's just a question of, do we have an audience that already should know this stuff? And let's sort of walk them along the path to get the answer on their own. Or do we have an audience that has no right to know this, no need to know this, but we're going to teach them anyway, so that they have the tools that they need in the future to get to where we need them to be.
Absolutely.
It's really interesting. And I have actually a follow-up there. So you mentioned that every merchant's different. And this problem spans a lot of different disciplines, right? You've got security, you've got payment processing, you've got compliance, you've got marketing, application development. It's very, it's the revenue for the company. So it touches a lot of different departments. Nate and maybe Art, then when you guys speak to folks in this context of payment pages, what are the roles you're speaking to? Where are they coming from, and who ends up getting dragged into it? I'm just curious what you've seen professionally.
That's a good one. Well, it depends. I have some clients that bring in a cast of thousands always, and so they'll start with the CTO, the CISO, and everybody all the way down, and then 20 minutes into the meeting, they start to disappear because they realize I have nothing to add, nor do I understand anything going on in this room. So they're all gone. But typically, I end up speaking with this particular development with version 4. I'm speaking to people a little higher than I always used to, because I think what's happened, and it's a good thing, I was actually the boy who cried wolf on a lot of this stuff. When the first drafts and things were coming out on 4.0, I was already telling my clients, okay, let's get ready, let's go, come on, and so I was pushing my regular contacts that I would put at department level heads pretty much as the highest that I was speaking to. And I was already pushing them. And what they're doing is they were in turn going to the higher ups. And so hopefully they didn't frighten them, but I told them, you need to let them know, because, we're going to have some more work. And And so one of the things that I always do when I'm on site is I demand a whiteboard and colored pens, because 99% of the time we've got to diagram something. And but it's funny because everything's about a notch up now. When I go on site, I've got, the CISO wants to know, the CTO wants to know, and that's good. But I don't know how long they'll stay in it. Nate, we have to have a local hero with every client. You have to have that one guy or gal that, is on your side. And so that hasn't changed much, but it is good that the higher ups are involved and understand, and they don't get it slapped on them last minute.
Yeah. I agree. I think we are fortunate in that a lot of the merchants that we work with, there is good involvement from security leadership, whether that's the CISO or deputy CISO or somebody in that. There's good involvement from the leadership in the audit or compliance arm as well. And so we get to talk to those people quite a bit, and that's been the case for a while for most of our clients. What's different here is that now they are learning the questions asked of the people that are on the ground. You keep hands on keyboard doing this work, right? And so just a recent audit we did, I had the CISO and I had the lead developer in the room in the same interview, and we were talking about things. And so the CISO's learning things on the call sometimes, and like, wait a minute. So I thought we outsourced all of that to so-and-so provider, and they do all our development for us. And the developer's like, yeah, but sometimes when I do QA, I have to make a change to the code because we got a deadline and, whatever. And I'm like, well, that's kind of a problem then. So who's checking your work, And so we have these conversations. It's been great for visibility within those organizations, and it's been in terms of like, improving the visibility and understanding what's going on better. It also sometimes creates a little speed bumps where we're like, okay, well, actually, I need you to do like these 4 things in the next couple of weeks so that we make sure we're good for this year and like all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think, I try to talk to people at lots of different levels in these audits and when I'm talking about these, but I really want to talk to the person that's closest to the keyboard to validate some of this stuff, because I don't care what the CISO says he thinks is supposed to happen. I've seen too many times where like, no, we definitely do this. And then I go talk to the guy on the keyboard and he's like, well, yeah, that doesn't always work. And so I have to do this. And so I want to try and talk to the developer or the person that manages that relationship with the developers or whatever it might be, as much as I can.
Yeah, I think that multidisciplinary thing, and of course, developers being a very protected resource, every minute that they're not writing code is not good for anybody, for the company. I've heard, just as an anecdote, some organizations establishing what they call a tag council, where a tag being slang for script, where they all meet on a quarterly or something basis. And I always imagine kind of robes and torches or something like that, council. But it does go to show that like there is, like we were saying before, there's a policy part of this, there's a person part of it, there may or may not be a tool aspect to it, depending on what the organization decides, but it's just such an ingrained topic across the thing, across an enterprise. I do have a couple, we're getting to the end here. Anybody wants their questions in, now's a great time to submit them. I want to talk about some of the specific recommendations in 643 and somewhat 1161. So there's 3 things that are called out as guidance for how to address it. One of them is a proprietary tag management system to prevent malicious stuff. That's that's me. The other 2 are content security policy and sub-resource integrity, CSP and SRI. So I was curious if you guys had opinions on those or had seen them in the wild yet, or just general musings on CSP and SRI, if you don't mind.
Well,
yeah.
I think, go ahead, Nate.
Oh, no. Yeah, I mean, I think, we're definitely talking about those things, right? And I think they're just like anything else. And actually, I recently wrote a blog post sort of thinking about this problem because I was getting this question a lot. Do I need to buy a tool, or can I use CSPs, or can I use SRI? I mean, it depends. Like, that's our favorite answer, right? So I think it really depends on the organization, the expertise, the capabilities, and the infrastructure that we're protecting, the architecture we're protecting. I think they're attractive to some organizations because they can just do that. Like we can just use CSPs, we can use SRAs. It's not that difficult it's not that costly an investment for them. It's the time and the people necessary with the expertise to do those things for them. But then they get to that point and they're like, well, actually, we don't have anybody who knows how to do this. And it's a bigger problem to manage than we thought initially. So I think it's a good, those things can be really good fits for some organizations. But again, we're going to be looking for, is this implemented? Are we implementing these in a way that meets all of the requirements of the controls or the requirements of the DSS? And are we managing and maintaining those things appropriately?
Yeah, I think one of the problems with the SRI is I don't know how effective it really is in terms of think about it. It's kind of browser based, right? The browser determines if I pull this in, is this a safe resource that I'm yanking in? And it seems to me that it misses. Depending on the browser, I don't know that it's a perfect science, I guess is what I'm saying, because I've captured data. What I like to do is capture packets to see what goes back and forth between a session completely from the browser coming up and everything that happens. And so while I think some organizations, if they're very skilled and talented and they really understand, sub-resource integrity, and they really understand how to use it, that can be a good one. Same with the CSP stuff, but I don't know that that's going to be something that a lot of organizations are going to get the same kind of power out of as others. So that's, yeah, I think it is, and it depends. I would take it on a case by case basis with the.
Well, nothing wrong with that, right? I mean, these regulations or compliance matters apply to such a wide swath of different organizations and different teams and everything else. I usually describe CSP and SRI as what I call well-intentioned technologies. Like when the World Wide Web Consortium put them in the web spec, they do so. Here's a great use case. You're a merchant, you write your whole web app, you know everything about it, you know what servers it lives on, you know what code it executes, it doesn't call anything else from the internet. Cool. You can, because CSP and SRI require very strict identification of every single resource, and you have to call them out by URL. And if you get any of that wrong, it breaks. Like the browser will deny the request. So once you try to apply it to this, Google Analytics and every other marketing tool in the world integrated into the web app, unless the merchant has a very, very fluid process between dev and marketing and the vendors and everything else, it just starts to kind of fray at the edges. And unfortunately, what I've seen more often than not is the definitions, the things that you're allowed to do and not allowed to do by CSP and SRI become so broad that it's kind of like, we have 15 deadbolts on the front of our house, but we'd never lock any of them. So it's like, all right, well, I guess you have blocks. That must be good enough. But no, you have to make the rules so open that they no longer actually effectively provide security. So I think
I had, not to interrupt you, but I had one client, that's perfect analogy, because I had one client that SRA broke everything for him. And they got so angry about it that then they went and they loosened it up to the point where it was doing nothing. And then the worst part about it is it fed that myth that security was always breaking everything. Oh, you security guys, you come in here. I've been listening to that since the 70s in the military, and it's like, yeah, it must be you. You did it, because every time we see security come in here, and I think you're right, SRI and CSP, they're very well intentioned. But unless they have that dance, as you called it, that connection between everything that has to be connected to make SRI really work properly, just like I said, I'm not down on it. It's just that I've never seen. That doesn't mean it can't be done. I think your original description, they know everything. They do everything. Boom, boom, boom. But who has that? Sales and marketing are going to come in and they're going to get you. That's all there is to it. Yeah, that's their job.
I built websites for 15 years, and then we started calling them web apps and did a bunch of other stuff. But we just did whatever we want, and we, and that legacy continues. It's a very cowboy part of application development, for good and for bad. thank you guys. I think we've got just a few more, just like maybe 120 seconds left. I have a couple of very detailed questions. I may have to follow up with those afterwards. But yeah, maybe let's find a concluding thought here. What would the advice you guys would give to the audience as they're walking out of here today? Like, if you're going to Google something right after this, what would you recommend as far as getting started with 643 and 1161? So maybe Nate, you want to give us your first stab there?
Yeah, no, I think I think that a lot of organizations, so if you're not feeling super confident in where you're at, I think you're not in bad company. I think a lot of organizations are there and still trying to understand what this is all going to mean for them next year. I think, reaching out to your acquirer, and let's try and do them all, right? It depends. Reach out to your acquirer, reach out to the brands, and reach out to QSA. You could do at least a couple of those, right? And start to get an understanding of if you've got an audit that's coming up, pretty soon. Make sure that your engagement includes at least some discussion on these topics. We know 643 and 11.6 are going to be required. They're going to be best practices for a while for this year. So you should, as you're going through this next round, and you're able to get one more audit in before you have a rock where these are required, start talking to your QSAs and say, hey, help me understand based on what you know about my environment. Help me understand where I need to be making changes and need to do things differently. That's a thing that we've been doing with all of ours for the last year or so is like, you got your rock, but we're also going to give you like a real short, like 3 slides that say, here are the things that we know about your environment that are going to cause problems for you in version 4. And so be prepared to work through those. And then, yeah, just stay close to your QSA, stay close to your acquirer, make sure that you have an understanding of what the expectations are going to be from them, and then do the work that needs to be done to meet those expectations.
And Art, what do you think people should walk out of here top of the mind, maybe?
Well, I kind of agree right off the bat. Their individual QSA is the best place to start because the QSA knows their environment. I did something very similar here at Trusted Sec. I put together a little, almost like a little mini gap assessment that is a generic one for these requirements, and just kind of made it like a little infogram paper or whatever you want to call it, a little white paper, but I don't think it's that. But I've been doing that with all my clients. But I think everyone should go out of here and sort of hop around and maybe Google the 2 requirements, and you'll be surprised at the stuff that pops up, and kind of start looking through it and start thinking about what's going to work best. Talk to your QSA. If your QSA recommends that, you're good enough to take this on in-house, well, maybe that's the way to go. But if you're like me, and so far I don't have a client yet that I would recommend that to, and I have some clients that have very, very smart people, but they don't have the time. They don't have they don't have the time or the ability to do this in addition to what they have to already do. And so my recommendation is going to be to them to go the tool approach, and also, put the operations and the logistics around it. But I would say go out and Google, 6.4.3, 11.6.1, and boy, you're going to be amazed at the stuff that pops up. So start looking at it all and understand that there are some great tools out there. And I think that, if your QSA feels, as I do with most of mine, I have one client I'm on the fence with, I should say, that I think they could possibly do something, but I'm still kind of on the fence. But I mostly deal with merchants, and most of the merchants I deal with, it's not to say I don't deal with some service providers. I actually deal with quite a few, but the merchants I deal with, they just don't have an IT department. They might be good at making burgers or pizza or sandwiches or whatever on the food side, or they're real good at selling wagons and tools and whatever. They're real good at what they do, but their IT department is just going to be totally overwhelmed if you try to get them to figure this out, because most of them have that 90s web structure I was talking about earlier. Mm-hmm. They slapped an iframe in there, we're good. And now it's been how many years, right? And that's all got to change. And I think that, they're just going to be so challenged. It's not worth it.
I think that's very valuable advice. I want to thank both of our guests, Art and Nate. This has really been invaluable. I learned a lot. I hope the audience found it useful as well. Source Defense does provide some free tools if anybody wants to get their hands around this getting started. Even if you do have that 90s kind of architecture, don't worry about it. We can help. This is a free offering. Go ahead and hit that QR code or that URL, sourcedefense.com/free-PCI, and we can get you set up with some ways to get your hands around it initially at no charge whatsoever. So thank you guys both. We greatly appreciate it. And thank you to our audience for your time and attention. We appreciate that as well. I hope everybody has a great day. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Art. Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
Bye, folks. Thanks, Nate.